Hi friends, today we're reading chapter 12 of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. What it said on the golden ticket. Charlie burst through the door screaming, "Mother, mother, mother!" Mr. Bucket was in his old grandparents' room serving them their evening soup. "Mother!" yelled Charlie, rushing into them like a hurricane. "Look, I've got it, Mother! Look! The last golden ticket, it's mine! I found some money in the street and I bought 2 candy bars and the second one had a golden ticket. And there were crowds of people all around me wanting to see it, and the shopkeeper rescued me and I ran all the way home and here it is. I have the 5th golden ticket, Mother. Look, I found it." Mrs. Bucket simply stood and stared, while the other 4 old grandparents, who were sitting up in their bed balancing bowls of soup in their laps, all dropped their spoons with a clatter and froze against their pillows. For about 10 seconds, there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared to speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then, very softly, Grandpa Joe said, "You're pulling our legs, aren't you, Charlie?" "You have to be joking." "I am not," said Charlie, rushing up to the bed and holding out a large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for the verdict. Then, very slowly, with a slow and marvelous grin spreading over his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The color was rushing into his cheeks, and his eyes were wide open, shining with joy, and the center of each eye, right in the very center of the black pupil, was a little spark of excitement that was slowly dancing. The old man took a deep breath, and suddenly, without warning whatsoever, an explosion seemed to take place inside him. He threw his arms up and yelled, "Yippee!" And at the same time, his long, bony body rose up out of the bed, and his bowl of soup went flying into the face of Grandpa Josephine. And in one fantastic leap, the old fellow of 96 and a half, who hadn't been out of bed for the last 20 years, jumped onto the floor and started a dance of victory in his pajamas. "Yippee!" he shouted. 3 cheers for Charlie. Hip, hip, hooray. At this point, the door opened, and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. He was cold and tired, and he looked ill, and he looked it. All day long, he had been shoveling snow in the streets. "Oh, what is going on in here?" It didn't take long for them to tell them what had happened. "I don't believe it," he said. "It's not possible." "Show him the ticket, Charlie," said Grandpa Joe, who was still dancing around the floor like a devil in his striped pajamas. "Show your father the 5th ticket, the last golden ticket in the world." "Let me see it, Charlie," Mr. Bucket said, collapsing into a chair and holding out his hand. Charlie came forward with the precious document. It was a very beautiful thing. This golden ticket, having been made so it seemed from a sheet of pure gold hammered out of the thinness of paper. On one side of it, printed by some clever method in jet black letters, was the invitation itself from Mr. Wonka. He read it aloud, said Grandpa Joe, climbing back into the bed again at last. "Let us all hear exactly what it says." Mr. Bucket held the lovely document, golden ticket, up to his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly as he seemed to be overcome by the whole business. He took several deep breaths, and then he cleared his throat and said, "All right, I'll read it. Here it goes. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket, from Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by your hand. Tremendous things are in store for you now. Many wonderful surprises await you. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for the whole day. You and all the others who are lucky enough to find my golden tickets. I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around my factory itself, showing you everything there is to see, and afterwards, when it is time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks. These trucks, I can promise you, will be loaded with enough delicious edibles to last you and your entire household for many years. If at any time you run out of these supplies, you only need to come back to the factory and show this golden ticket, and I will be happy to refill your cupboard with whatever you want. In this way, you will be able to keep yourself supplied with these tasty morsels for the rest of your life. But this is by no means the most exciting part of what will happen on the day of your visit. I am preparing other surprises that are even more marvelous and more fantastic for you and all of my beloved golden ticket holders. Mystic and marvelous surprises that will entrance, delight, intrigue, astonish, and perplex you beyond measure. In your wildest dreams, you could never have imagined that such sweet things could happen to you. Just wait and see. And now, here are your instructions. The day I have chosen for your visit is the 1st day of the month in February. On this day, and on no other day, you must come to the factory at 10 o'clock sharp in the morning. Don't be late. And you are allowed to bring with you either 1 or 2 members of your family to look after you and to ensure that you don't get into mischief. One more thing. Be certain to have this golden ticket with you, otherwise you will not be admitted. Signed, Mr. Wonka. The 1st day of February? That's tomorrow! Today is the last day of January. I know this. "Oh, boy," said Mr. Bucket, "I think you're right." "You're just in time," shouted Grandpa Joe. "There's not a moment to lose. You must start preparations at once. Wash your face, comb your hair, scrub your teeth, brush your hair, Blow your nose, cut your nails, polish your shoes, iron your shirt, and for heaven's sakes, get all of that mud off your pants. You must be ready, my boy. You must be ready for the biggest day of your life. Now don't overexcite yourself, Grandpa Joe, Mrs. Bucket said, and don't fluster poor Charlie. We must all try to keep very calm. Now the first thing to decide is, who is Charlie going to take with him to the factory? I will, shouted Grandpa Joe, jumping out of bed once. I'll take him. I'll look after him. You leave it to me. Mrs. Bucket smiled at the old man, and then she turned to her husband and said, How about you, dear? Don't you think you should go? Well, Mr. Bucket said, pausing to think about it, I'm not sure I should. But you must. There's no must about it, my dear, Mr. Bucket said. Mind you, I'd love to go. It'd be super exciting, but on the other hand, I believe that the person who really deserves to go is Grandpa Joe. He seems to know more about it than we do, provided, of course, that he feels well enough. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe, seizing Charlie by the hands and dancing around the room. He certainly seems well enough, Mrs. Bucket said, laughing. Yes, perhaps you're right. Perhaps Grandpa Joe should be the one to go with him. I certainly cannot go myself and leave the other 3 old people alone in the bed for the whole day. Hallelujah, Grandpa Joe said. Praise the Lord. At this point, there came a loud knock on the front door. Mr. Bucket went to open it, and the next moment, a swarm of newspaper men and photographers were pouring into the house. They had tracked down the finder of the 5th golden ticket, and now all wanted to get the full story for the front pages of the morning paper. For several hours, there was complete pandemonium in the house, and it must have been nearly midnight before Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them so Charlie could go to bed. Chapter 13, The Big Day Arrives. The sun was shining brightly on the morning of the big day, but the ground was still white with snow and the air was very cold. Outside the gates of Wonka's factory, enormous crowds of people had gathered to watch the 5 lucky ticket holders go in. The excitement was tremendous, and it was just before 10 o'clock. The crowds were pushing and shouting, and policemen with arms linked were trying to get hold of them back at the gates. Right beside the gates, in small groups, there was carefully shielded by the crowds by the police, stood the 5 famous children, together with the grown-ups who had come with them. A tiny, bony old figure of Grandpa Joe could be seen standing quietly among them, and beside him, holding tightly onto his hand, was little Charlie Bucket himself. All the children except Charlie had both their mothers and fathers with them, and it was a good thing that they had. Otherwise, the whole party might have gotten out of hand. They were so eager to get in with their parents, they were having to hold them back by force to prevent them from climbing over the gates. Be patient, cried the fathers. Be still. It's not time yet. It's not even 10 o'clock. Beside him, Charlie Bucket could hear the shouts of the people in the crowd as they pushed and fought to get a glimpse of the famous children. There's Violet Beauregard, he heard someone shouting. That's her all right. I can remember her face from the papers. And you know what? Somebody else shouted back. She's chewing that dreadful old piece of gum she's had for months. Just look at her jaw. They're still working on it. Who's the big kid? That's Augustus Glump. So it is. Boy, is he enormous. Fantastic. Who is the kid? Who's the kid with the picture of the Lone Ranger stenciled on his windbreaker? That's Mike TV. He's the television kid. He must be crazy. Look at all those crazy pistols he's got hanging all over him. The one I want to see is Veruca Schultz, shouted another voice in the crowd. She's the girl whose father bought 500,000 candy bars and then made all of his workers in the peanut factory unwrap each and every one until she found a golden ticket. He gives her anything she wants, absolutely anything. She only has to start screaming for it and she gets it. Dreadful, isn't it? Shocking, I call it. Which one do you think is her? That one, over there on the left, the little girl in the silver mink coat. Which one is Charlie Bucket? Charlie Bucket? He must be that skinny one over there, standing beside the old fellow who looks like a skeleton. Right close to us, just there, see him? He hasn't gotten a coat on him in this cold weather. Don't ask me. Maybe he can't afford to buy one. Jeeps, he must be freezing. Charlie, standing only a few paces away from the speaker, gave Grandpa Joe's hand a squeeze, and the old man looked down at Charlie and smiled. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock began to strike 10. Very slowly, with a loud creaking of rusty hinges, the great iron gates of the factory began to swing open. The crowd suddenly became silent. The children stopped jumping about. All eyes were fixed upon the gates. There he is, someone shouted. That's him! And so it was, Mr. Willy Wonka.